Hello and welcome to the History of Bangalore. I'm Ramjee Chandran with episode 115 of season 3. This episode and the next, that's episodes 115 and 116, are being released together as a two-part series, a twofer of the fall of Bangalore. What you're about to hear is part 1, the siege. Part 2, the breach, follows immediately. You might remember that this is part of a battle that began 2 episodes ago on this podcast, when British troops under their commander Charles Cornwallis marched on to the Deccan Plateau towards Bangalore. The taking of Bangalore was the first step in the war on the Mysore kingdom, and in the last episode, the British took the first step in the Battle of Bangalore, that is, the taking of the Bengaluru Pete. The Pete fell in just 2 hours, and Tipu Sultan, watching from the outside, ordered his general Qamardeen Khan to take it back at all costs. In this episode, I take off from there. But before any takeoff, first, I must take a beat to thank my sponsors, the Prestige Group, for their corporate support. Building cities one landmark at a time, they transform dreams into reality. You can be a part of the future. Simply add prestige to your life. Qamardeen Khan marshaled his forces together at their camp in Baswangudi, and then he launched his counterattack. It was not an attack of brute force, but of planned deception designed to fool the British. A column of Tipu's troops would advance in plain sight towards the northeast section of the fort, visible, deliberate, even opening a cannonade at a distance, drawing British attention to their side. While that was happening, Qamardeen Khan would move his real forces, his real strength, quietly towards the Pete itself, slipping back in, through the gates, through the confusion. Tipu had also assigned another general, Syed Sahib, to coordinate the effort. 2 generals, a 2-pronged plan, and an element of surprise. But Cornwallis, a veteran of warfare, read this immediately. He shifted the 76th Regiment to the right of the position, exactly where he knew that the real attack would be coming. When Qamardeen's troops advanced, they came on hard, with conviction, as though they had no doubt about the outcome. They ran headlong into the 76th and the 36th Regiments. The Mysore casualties exceeded 2,000 men. Qamardeen and Syed Sahib pulled back. They moved to a rise of the earth near the fort, and then they asked Tipu for permission to charge again. But Tipu refused. Save it, he said, for another time. The attempt to recover the Pete in Tipu's heart was over. So by the 12th of March, the Bengaluru Pete was British. Now, they put together their forces to attack the fort. Between the 7th and the 12th of March, while Qamardeen's assault was being repulsed, the rest of the British army wasn't idle. Working parties were out, cutting bamboo, gathering materials, constructing redoubts and flashes in front of the encampments. A redoubt is something like a detached, enclosed earthwork. It's like a standalone defensive position, a mini fort outside the fort, if you like, which is capable of sustaining fire from all directions. A flash is simpler. It's 2 mud walls that are joined at an angle, which is open at the back, and it's designed to direct the fire forward. So these were not strong, permanent fortifications. They were careful, methodical preparations of an army that knew that it was settling in for some serious work. And these redoubts and flashes were designed to blunt the force of the oncoming army and take the first line of fire. On the 12th of March 1791, the bombardment of the Bangalore Fort began. It's worth pausing here, because what followed over the next 9 days was not simply a matter of pointing guns at a wall or the door and firing endlessly. It was a systematic, methodical operation which was more engineering than it was battle. A 10-gun battery operated first. It was tasked with stripping the outer defenses. Not yet to create a breach, not yet, but just to begin the process of wearing the fort down, layer by layer. Alongside it, a 2-gun battery was positioned to fire in what is called an enfilade. along the length of the wall rather than directly at the face of it, so that a single shot could travel across the full surface of the defensive work and strike multiple points in succession as it bounced along. And another battery was set to fire in ricochet, and that's cannonballs which are delivered at a low angle, as skipping and bouncing along the ground, just like you might skip stones on the surface of water, for example. And these cannonballs would reach behind parapets and into positions that direct fire could not touch. This was Captain Alexander Kidd of the Bengal Engineers and the team around him doing what the sappers had been trained to do, turning the geometry of the fort against itself, finding angles, calculating distances, not charging but thinking, math. Kidd's 9-gun battery opened fire on the 15th of March. A mortar battery went into action at the same time, laid out in the section of the Pete ditch closest to the fort. Now, this would be somewhere close to where we know Kalasipalayam to be. From the 15th of March onwards, the combined fire from all the batteries in their positions along the fort began to produce what contemporary accounts describe as considerable effect. By the 16th, a day later that is, the sustained bombardments were starting to tell. The first curtain, which is the stretch of wall to the east of the Delhi gate, where the engineers had calculated that the fort was most vulnerable and where eventually that the breach would happen, was beginning to show the first cracks. From the opening of the battery on the 12th until this day, as one account puts it, all damage had either been neither significant nor important, and now for the first time it was. But here is what British accounts of those days don't spend enough time on. While all of this careful systematic engineering was proceeding on one side of the wall, Bahadur Khan was hitting back from inside it, from the other side of the wall, inside the fort. Roderick Mackenzie, who was there, a British officer, published his account just 2 years after those events, and they are telling. They described the Kiledar of Bangalore, which is Bahadur Khan, as respectable from an old age of temperate living, with a beard every hair of which vied with silver in whiteness. Now, this was not just a passive defender sitting behind the walls waiting for the end. Bahadur Khan came out swinging. From inside the fort, he sent out sallies, fast cavalry riding outside the gate, striking at British positions and withdrawing before they could be fully engaged. One such sally fell on the 76th Regiment of the Madras Infantry and the 28th Bengal Sepoy Battalion. The British repulsed it, but at a cost. And alongside the sallies, Bahadur Khan kept up the rockets, volley after volley of the famous Mysore rocket landing in the British camp. These were the very rockets that had won them the Battle of Polilur and the surrender of Colonel Bailey. There was confusion, there were fires, casualties among men and animals on the British side. And in one of those rocket volleys, the rockets found their mark on 2 of Cornwallis's guns. By guns, we mean cannons, an 18-pounder and a 24-pounder, destroying them outright. It is almost impossible for us sitting today to consider what that meant for a siege train. Cornwallis had brought 11 18-pounder cannons from Bengal at an enormous cost, dragging them along the Mughali Pass with 67 elephants and 40,000 bullocks. Every gun in that train was irreplaceable on this campaign. And Bahadur Khan, from inside a fort that was supposedly under siege, had just destroyed 2 of the 11 cannons. This was not a simple matter for the British. Now for a short commercial break, and after the break, there was a forage crisis that threatened to end the siege even before the breach happened on the evening of the 16th. And I will be back with that story right after this.
Maximum connectivity, maximum luxury, maximum lifestyle. Live your max at Prestige Raintree Park. Opulent residences nestled in 21 acres of breathtaking landscape with 1 lakh plus square feet of clubhouse, 3 swimming pools, and ample leisure and sports amenities. Experience exquisite living at Prestige Raintree Park in prime Whitefield with schools, offices, hospitals, and shopping malls just a hop away. Call 81399 or visit prestigeconstructions.com to know more. Radar approved.
Hi, I'm back. So this battle was not necessarily just a one-sided affair as British accounts have them. And that is the funny thing about contemporary accounts, because what you read depends on what it is that the authors of those accounts intended to portray. Some of them wanted to portray the siege as something enormously difficult that required vast amounts of heroics to win. The others played it all down as if the British forces were strong anyway, and it took very little to wipe anybody out in their path. But whatever you've read or been told about colonial sieges just being a matter of British guns battering down a wall while the defenders cowered behind it, well, that's not what happened at Bangalore in the second week of March 1791. The defenders were attacking the attackers, and the defenders were the ones doing the initial damage. That Mysore rocket corps, it should be said, was not some kind of a crude field improvisation. French and Tipu's engineers working together created these iron-cased rockets stabilized by the bamboo poles inside them, and they were capable of carrying incendiary or highly explosive payloads over distances that conventional artillery of the period, which means bullets and cannonballs, could not always match. The rockets had been developed and refined under both Hyder and Tipu over decades of warfare. The British had encountered them before and had not found an answer to them. At Bangalore that day, when Bahadur Khan fired those volleys from the ramparts of the Bangalore Fort, they were effective enough that years later, a British officer named William Congreve would study these captured rockets, reverse engineer the design, and produce the Congreve rocket. Then that is the weapon that would be used against Napoleon's forces in Europe a few years later, and it gave its name to the rocket's red glare in the American national anthem when they used it against Fort McHenry on the East Coast. The weapon that was tormenting Cornwallis's camp in March 1791 had, in a roundabout way, a much longer reach into history than anyone standing in that battlefield that day could have imagined. But in the immediate practical sense, Bahadur Khan's rockets were making Cornwallis's position worse by the day, and then there was a second crisis, one that had nothing to do with rockets or sallies, and this was forage. Forage was what armies did just to survive, to eat. They would roam the countryside, picking up anything that could be either eaten immediately or cooked. Cornwallis, you might remember, had 40,000 bullocks and many, many elephants, and they all needed to eat, not to mention all the soldiers. And the British found that they could not buy fodder because nobody would sell it to them at any price. Tipu's scorched earth strategy, it's the same one that had crippled General Meadows' campaign the previous year, was working again. The countryside around Bangalore had been stripped. Hundreds of bullocks serving the British Army were dying every day. Picture the arithmetic. Every gun that needs to be repositioned, every cartload of shot, water for the camp, all of it depends on animals that were now dying faster than they could be replaced. The siege of Bangalore was, from its first week, a race against logistical collapse. Not because of the starvation of soldiers, not yet, but of the animals that made the entire siege apparatus move. And Bahadur Khan's continuing harassment was making that race worse. Every sally, every rocket volley forced the British to divert time and resources to defense, time and energy that could not be spent on the business of actually attacking and taking over the fort. So by the middle of March 1791, Cornwallis had on his hands a very serious problem. He had the longest and the strongest siege train ever assembled in this theatre of war. He had momentum. He had the Triple Alliance. He had the Nizam of Hyderabad and the Marathas in it. And he had arrived on the plateau the entire march through a deception by changing his route, which means he didn't have a battle in transit and therefore never lost a man in transit. But here he was, being slowly bled out by an old man with a white beard who refused to simply sit still and besieged. The siege wasn't going well for Cornwallis. Something had to change. And on the evening of 16th of March, something did. Cornwallis received intelligence. It was a specific piece of information about Tipu's intentions for the following morning. And he made his decision that, on the surface, looked like a simple defensive prudence, but which turned out to be one of the most elegant pieces of battlefield theatre in this particular campaign. Cornwallis ordered the British cavalry moved, not very far but just into a hollow nearby, which is a natural depression in the ground near the camp, low enough that the horses and riders once inside it could be invisible from the ramparts of the fort. But here's the clever part. In the place that they used to be, the tents stayed up. Empty cavalry tents were left standing exactly where they had been. So from the walls of the Bangalore Fort, through whatever telescope or the naked eye of Bahadur Khan's lookouts, the British camp would have looked completely unchanged. Same tents, same layout, same apparent disposition of forces. Meanwhile, under cover of darkness, the British cavalry, horses and all, were quietly led down into that hollow, out of the line of sight and out of the line of fire. And into the open space the cavalry had vacated moved an infantry. But they were not standing in the open. They took up positions using the camp's bunds and shallow trenches, low earthwork that any camp accumulates over days of occupation. From a distance, in low light, infantry crouched behind a bund looks like nothing in particular, certainly not like a regiment waiting for something to happen. When the sun went down on the 16th of March, Bahadur Khan's gunners on the ramparts would have looked out at the British camp and seen, to all appearances, exactly what they had seen the night before. Cavalry tents in their usual place, the general shape and movement of the camp unchanged. What they could not see was that the tents were empty and that several thousand infantrymen were now lying low in trenches and behind earthen bunds, directly underneath what the Mysore gunners on the ramparts believed was still the cavalry line. In the next episode, let's call it Tomorrow at Dawn, those gunners will open fire on what they are certain is Cornwallis's cavalry. What was that piece of intelligence that Cornwallis received? Who fed Cornwallis this intelligence? What did it cost? And how did the strongest fort in the subcontinent finally fall? All that in part 2, The Breach, and that is available to you right now. I am Ramjee Chandran and this is the history of Bangalore.